Hi, I'm Dr. Bobby Stanley.
And hi, I'm Dr. Phil Shaheen, and we're the host of the $1 Million Podcast.
Today, we want to continue our conversation about profit. We talked about what profit was. We talked about overhead. We talked about break-even points. We talked about profit margins on our last podcast. So if you guys haven't heard that last podcast, please go back and listen to that because it's great information. And we want to go into the conversation of profit per procedure, because I can understand how dentists would feel like this is overwhelming to them. Just the thought of having to figure out what each procedure costs them is just a little bit daunting, and I think it's important.
What we're trying to talk about here today is profit margins. That's a term that comes straight out of retail. When retailers sell a t-shirt, how do they decide how much to price the t-shirt at? I only learned that when I saw my wife. She was a merchant in a retailer in Columbus, Ohio. And I kept on looking at her Excel spreadsheets, and I could not believe that they could, make a T-shirt for $1.50.
Wow.
And yet they would come back to the stores and sell the T-shirt for $30. Here I am thinking, oh my God, these retailers are making a killing.
Yes.
And she looks at me, she's like, well, wait a second. You just looked at the cost of goods. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Well, you're only looking at the raw material for the T-shirt. You haven't included transportation. You haven't included taxes. You haven't included warehouse. You haven't included the people that get paid. You haven't included the people that are selling the T-shirt. So by the time you calculate everything, our margins on a T-shirt are maybe 50%. But we know we're not going to sell every single T-shirt for that margin. We're going to have to do some sales, and a lot of people won't buy until there's a sale. So all blended in, maybe we make 10-15% on that product.
So what you're telling me is that my crown profit is not the cost of my crown minus my lab fee?
No, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Okay. I think you're missing out on so many expenses that you're not calculating when you're thinking like this.
Okay, well, let's go into detail.
Yeah, well, it's really hard for us to understand that everything we touch has a cost, because we never look at it per item. We're just looking at it as the supply bill or the lab bill or this and this and that. But if you broke it down piece by piece by piece, just like construction companies do when they're building a building, they know each nail how much it costs, and they know on average how many nails it's going to take to, build this room and things like that. We as dentists should know each one of our procedures, how much it costs us. Therefore, knowing how much it provides, how much of a margin it provides us of profit. How are you going to set your prices and your fees if you don't know how much a procedure costs you?
Well, I will tell you that is one of the number one questions that I get from young dentists. They want to know, how do you set your fees, especially for big procedures like dental implants? They want to be in the ballpark of all their neighbors, and they want to be compatible with everybody around them. But what I tell them is they have to understand their overhead. You can't base your prices on what the guy next door charges, because you have to make a profit from that. You have to pay the bills from that. So it's important that we understand how much that costs us.
Pricing typically comes from the data that's gathered from surveys. They take, all the dentists in, 90210 zip code, and they say this guy charges this much, this guy charges this much, and now we'd have a percentile. The top 95th percentile charges this much, and if you're in the 50th percentile, you charge, and that's the fee that you should charge. The problem with that, it is not specific to your practice.
Yes.
What if you practice in 90210 and your rent is out the wazoo? Well, you have to account for that. So one of the exercise, and it takes a lot of time, but it's worth the exercise. And once you've done it, it's very easy to update. You take each procedure, your top 20 procedures. And what do I mean by that? Crown prep, crown and build-up, root canal, filling, one surface, two surface, three surfaces. It's very important because there's a big difference. You should take prophies, child prophy versus adult prophy. There's a big difference in profit margin between the two. You got to look at your perio. You got to look at extractions. You got to look at implants. You have to look at all-on-X, snap-ons, dentures. Anything that you do more than once in your year, you should definitely break down the cost. And how do you do that? Well, you have to, first of all, understand that your treatment room has a cost. It has a standing cost per hour of operation. Each treatment room has that.
Yes, I think that's so important, and dentists don't realize that. And oftentimes a treatment room can go unused, and a dentist not even realize it. For instance, turning over a room. And you and I will go into how that plays into the profit, but it's important to understand that that room needs to be utilized to maximum capacity to make that a profitable room.
Bobby, what's the most valuable asset you have in your practice?
My time in my chair.
Your chair time.
Yes.
That's it. That's the most valuable thing you have.
Exactly.
You have to baby that time. You have to maximize that time. Do you want to work 12-hour days?
I do not.
No. So when you're at work and you decide that I'm coming from X time to X time, you want to be efficient. You want to maximize your time. There's nothing that drives me more nuts than seeing my friend saying, oh, I go to work and I watch CNN and I sit in my office.
I agree.
Why? I don't want to be at the office and then I'll watch CNN or Fox or anything like that. I just want you, when you're at the office, utilize your time.
Yes.
Efficiently. Do the best dentistry you can do. Be the best provider. Be very, amicable. Have the best bedside manners, and you can do all this by still being productive. Let's get back to that hourly cost of the treatment room. It kind of ties back into the fixed cost that we talked about at the other podcast. Okay, fixed costs don't change. They're there regardless if you produce $1 of dentistry or if you produce $0 of dentistry. Usually it's about the physical space, the rent, the mortgage, the utilities, everything that goes with it. Everything that you pay every month that if you don't pay, they'll take away, right? So
correct. And so we take that fixed cost and then we break that down on a per room basis?
Yes, but prior to breaking it down per room, you also have to know how often you're open. So you have to break it down per hour of operation.
So it's based on time also.
Time
Love that.
and space. Mm-hmm. So first thing you do, you have to do a little bit of reverse engineering. Take your whole year and calculate how many hours of operation you're open. And guess what? You can't tell me, well, I work 24 hours a week, therefore 24 times 4 times 12, and here we go. You can't calculate that because you're taking vacation time, you have holidays, you have lunches. I don't calculate lunch as open time.
No, exactly.
Because it's closed.
Also, when you have multiple doctors in the practice and a doctor, even if it's the key doctor, takes vacation time, that practice is still open. It's still the money's still flowing and the expenses are still flowing. So you can't say, well, I, as the key doctor, took off 3 weeks, so we don't count those 3 weeks because the bills are still flowing, correct?
That is correct. Once you establish the cost of every treatment room per hour, that cost is for every hour the practice is open, regardless of who's there and who's not there.
Yes.
So if you have associates, it's the same cost per hour for their room that if you were there. So once you have that metric and you know the cost per hour, it allows you to break down the cost and the profit margin for your procedure. So if I take, for example, a crown and buildup, and that's just one of the very simple procedures we do every day.
Before you go on, let me just ask this. So we have hygiene rooms and we have doctor rooms.
Correct.
Are we counting all of our rooms or
Absolutely.
are we counting just doctor rooms? Because our doctor rooms obviously produce more,
Correct.
but our hygiene rooms are also part of the practice.
Absolutely. You calculate it for every room.
Now,
let me put a little parentheses here. In our office, we don't have hygiene rooms and treatment rooms in the sense that each hygiene room can accommodate a procedure. Now, of course, I don't want to do a root canal in a hygiene room. But if I have to do a small occlusal or a couple fillings or an Invisalign impression or anything like that, I do it in the hygiene room because I also don't want to take on a whole treatment room to do something that's simple or quick.
So I will tell you, we are the exact same. All of our rooms are set up exactly the same so that if we have to step in and do hygiene in a treatment room or a treatment in a hygiene room, it's possible. Because if you see a small procedure in hygiene, we can get the patient numb while they're finishing their hygiene appointment, go in, do the restorative, and be out, and the hygiene has hardly even missed any time. So I think that's really important when you think like that, if you're setting up a new office, that you think about making your rooms identical so they can function that way.
Absolutely. And that becomes efficient. You waste less time and less money because you didn't have to bring the patient back. You didn't have a risk for the patient to change his appointment or miss their appointment. And it's a service to the patient. It will take the patient longer to go home, set up another appointment, and come back and take time off from work than doing it here and then.
And God forbid they cancel that appointment. Now you have administrative people at the front desk calling the patient, getting them rescheduled. I can't get them. I'm texting them. I'm leaving them voicemails. And finally I get them scheduled. Or maybe you don't ever get them scheduled. So you don't want to miss that opportunity to help your patient when the patient's there.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're right. So I'm going to get back to the profit margin per procedure. I have an Excel sheet that I've created, and it's very simple. First part, just list every item you use that you touch during a procedure.
So cotton rolls, gauze.
Everything. So I have, like, for example, for my crown and buildup breakdown, I have a section for sterilization. Oh, we forget that every time we use sterilized equipment, we need a sterilization bag. And in my practice, I use it, one for the cassette, one for the hand pieces, and one for the burr blocks. That's 3 sterilization bags.
That's amazing.
I use Cavicide for the room. And we also need to account for the sterilization person, the assistant that's bagging, putting in the shaker, then drying it, bagging it, putting in the sterilizer, and taking it out. That takes time, which means costs money, right? You got to account for that. Then you have your room set up. That's the easiest one to know because, you have the patient napkin, you have the paper trays, you have the saliva ejector, the high-speed suction. You might have some plastic here and there. You got to account for this. Each one individual is not expensive. But you add 2 cents to 9 cents to 5 cents to 14 cents, and you're like, oh my God, now it's a big number. And here's what I'm going to tell you about cost. If you've never divided it per unit, you will never realize how expensive things are.
Like gloves.
Like gloves. It's when you realize, oh my God, this was 50 cents for this, that you start thinking, like, well, did I really need this? Or do I need to pay this much for it?
Yes.
And then we can talk about how to fix this. But let's get back to the cost per crown. We have, when we're doing the crown prep, we usually do a temp tray, and then we use PVS to do our temporary, and the PVS needs a tip, and then we need a Q-tip so that we can put the topical. So that's 2 items again. Then I use a cotton roll and a 2x2, and I consider maybe 4 cotton rolls, 4 2x2s. Then I use a brand new prep burr. I also use, temporary material to cement my temporary that was made with some pro-temp that was also needed a gun, but the gun is reusable, but the tip is not. So you got to account for that. Even the floss, even if you pull 1 foot of floss, it's very cheap, but it's still 2 cents. And then you do this. If I do 10 crowns a day, it adds up.
Yes.
And again, I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying you need to know, and you will be shocked when you get to the bottom of it. If you consider that, between myself and my assistant, sometimes we do 5 sets of glove changes per patient.
And God forbid one falls on the ground when you're taking out a new one.
Yeah. So you are spending as you're going, and you need to account for that to know how profitable your crown procedure is. And when you tell me that, oh, my crown cost is, I charge $1,500 and my crown cost is $250, therefore, my profit is this. Well, it's not really true. You didn't account for the time of the room. You didn't account for your assistant. And I don't know for you guys, but with the inflation, everything is going up. Everything is costing me more, especially our team compensation. And then you have to think about the seat appointment. If you seat the same day, you need to think about your CERAC payment. You have to think about your blocks, but also you have to think about the extra half hour you take.
For them to sit in the chair.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it kind of washes off because I bring them back for another half hour to do the seat.
Of course.
The difference is I put it in an area that is double booked to me, so I'm not losing production time.
Yes.
I don't know how it works in your office, but my main column has to be productive.
Yes, I agree 100%. So you gather all this information, and one of the things for dentists that's really hard for them is they don't want to be business people. So sitting down and doing this is really a lot for them to do.
It's true.
I am really a big delegator. I think it's important to delegate to our team members and our assistants understand. And so maybe one day when we set up for a crown, we just take a quick picture of what's there, and then you have your assistant just list it all at some point when they have time. Maybe even when you're out of the office and they have a little bit of extra time. How did you do it, Dr. Shaheen?
Actually, that's a great idea. I kind of did it this way. I did it over a period of a week. I took a couple procedure at a time, and we just listed when it was set up. It's like, okay, take a picture and we list what's in there. And I do it again and again because sometimes there's more things in one procedure than on others. For example, there's a buildup, and sometimes I do the buildup with composite, and sometimes I'll do it with a comp core. So it makes a little bit of a difference. And I let my team members divide and give me the unit cost because they know what they're buying and how much they're paying for each item.
Yes.
Which, by the way, the cost of an item is not just the cost listed. You have to account for the tax and the shipping.
Yes.
We tend to forget those, but eventually, if everything you are using costs an additional 7.5% or 8% because there's tax on it, you can't forget that. It does add up. So the important number that comes out of this is what's your average, profit margin for a crown and build-up, and you get a percentage. It's 75%, it's 80%, it's 60%. That's what you want to know. Why do you want to know that, Bobby? Why do you think that's helpful to me to know that my crown is a 75% profit margin?
Well, for me, what it's telling me is that if I know what my hourly cost is for that chair, and if I can't make that work in that chair in that time period, then I have a problem.
Correct. You have an inefficiency somewhere. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing crown. We just have to figure out where we can change things.
I agree.
To make your crown procedure more profitable. I'll tell you, the number one place where I think you can change is the speed at which you do your procedure.
Well, funny you say that, because I think a lot of doctors, and I see it in my associates and sometimes even myself, I think a lot of doctors think, well, I'm going to do a CERAC crown. I do that in an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes every single time. But it's funny, once you time yourself, sometimes you may find that it's an hour and 20 minutes, not an hour and 15, or an hour and 45 minutes, not an hour and 30. So I think it's important to have the assistant set up a timer so that you can see. And if you have your assistant set up a timer from the time the patient's seated, doctor walks in to anesthetize, doctor comes back to start the procedure, procedure's done, now we're scanning, then it's in the CERAC machine, we're trying in, then we're bonding. All those little steps are steps that we can be more efficient. For instance, how long does it take for the patient to get numb? Maybe the dentist went to do some hygiene checks and then went back to their desk to check their email or check Instagram, and they let the patient sit an extra 10 minutes. And that's 10 minutes wasted in the whole procedure for the dentist, for the assistant, for the office, and for the patient. So I think it's important that we time that and have the assistant write that down several times so that we can see where we can be more efficient as dentists.
It's funny you mentioned. I actually have a challenge with our doctors at our office. I always challenge them. Take 10 minutes off of each procedure. See if you can do it. See if it changes anything to the end result.
I love that.
10 minutes is nothing.
And it's not compromising the patient's treatment.
Absolutely
It's just
not.
being more efficient when you're in the room. I mean, maybe you anesthetize the patient and you don't walk out of the room. Maybe you
take advantage of that time to talk to them.
Yes.
Or even better, listen to them.
Yes, I love that.
So, agreed. And the part where they need to realize, or everybody needs to realize, so let's say you see only 6 patients a day, but you shave 10 minutes on each procedure. That's a whole hour that you have, do you know what you can do in another hour a day? Another crown.
I love that.
Your profit just went up tremendously just by cutting 10 minutes on your procedures, because a lot of time we're wasting it. We're not we've said one day that it takes me an hour and a half to do a premolar root canal. We don't really know why, but it's been set like this a long time ago in our Dentrix or management software, and it's never been changed. But if you consistently finish early, change that.
Yes.
Make it 9 units. Make it 7 units, which is in our practice 10-minute increments. Make it an hour and 10 minutes instead of an hour and a half. You gain 20 minutes in your schedule.
Another fun fact there is if you set your increments on 10 minutes versus 15 minutes, you will save a tremendous amount of time. So if you have, for instance, Dentrix, and you have so many blocks for a crown, and they're 10-minute blocks, and you set 6 for an hour, that's a lot different than setting 15-minute blocks. If you change it to 10 minutes, you'll save a tremendous amount of time.
Absolutely. Because you can, when you do 15 minutes, it's 15 or nothing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Shaheen. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you soon for another episode of the $1 Million Dentist Podcast.